start tonight and read from a book that I've had since I was in high school. Alfred Hitchcock Presents Stories for Late at Night. Spooky stories. I'll start with the first story. Death is a dream. You're asleep now, David. Yes, I'm asleep. I want you to rest for a minute while I talk to your wife. All right, doctor, I'll rest. Your husband is under light hypnosis now, Mrs. Carpenter. We can talk without disturbing him. I understand, Dr. Manson. Now tell me about these nightmares he's been having. You say they started the night you were married? Yes, doctor, a week ago. We came here directly to our new house from the ceremony. We had a small wedding supper here and didn't retire until midnight. It was just dawn when David woke me by crying out in his sleep. He was twisting and struggling and saying something unintelligible. I woke him. He was pale and trembling and said he'd been having a nightmare. But he couldn't remember any of the details? No, nothing. He took a Seconal and went back to sleep. But then the next night, the same thing happened. And the next. It happened every night. A recurring nightmare, I see. But you mustn't be alarmed. I've known David since he was a boy. I think that we can rid him of his nightmares without difficulty. Oh, doctor, I hope so. Possibly Richard is trying to break through into his consciousness again. Richard? Who's Richard? Richard is David's other self, his other personality. I don't think I understand. When David was 12, he was in an automobile accident. This gave him severe nervous shock and resulted in a form of schizophrenia in which he developed two distinct personalities. One personality was David's normal self. The other, the second personality, was reckless and mischievous, completely uninhibited. David called his personality Richard and said it was his twin brother who lived in his mind. How strange, his wife said. There are many such cases in medical history. When David was tired or worried, Richard was able to take control of his actions. Then Richard did things like making David walk in his sleep and setting fire to his bedclothes. David couldn't help himself when Richard was in control. Sometimes he couldn't remember what happened. Other times he thought it was only a nightmare. How upsetting. I handled David's case at the time, and I thought that we had made a complete cure, banishing Richard for good. But it's possible that, well, I'll question David now about the recurrent dream. The details will probably tell us what we need to know. David? Yes, doctor. I want you to tell me about the dream that has been bothering you. You can remember it now, can't you? The dream. Yes, I remember it. I remember it now. You mustn't get excited. Just be perfectly calm and tell me about the dream. All right, I'll be calm. I'll be quite calm. That's fine. Now tell me about the first time you had the dream. The first time. That was the night that Anne and I were married. No, that's wrong. It was the night before we were married. You're sure of that? Yes, I had spent the whole day arranging my law practice so that I could take a few days off. In the evening, I came out to the new house we'd bought here in Riverdale to make sure everything was ready. I wanted everything to be perfect for Anne. It was nearly 11 before I went back to downtown to my bachelor apartment, and I was terribly tired. I went to bed, but I was too tired. I couldn't sleep. I took a Seconal tablet, but I had hardly fallen asleep before the dream began. How did it begin, David? I dreamt the telephone rang. The telephone actually was on the bedside table, and in my dream I sat up and answered it. For the moment, it seemed real to me. I thought I had actually answered the phone. Then I realized I was dreaming. What made you realize that, David? Because it was Luis who spoke to me, and even in my sleep, I knew that Luis was dead. When did Luis die, David? A year ago, she was driving through the mountains of West Virginia to visit her parents when her car went off the road. She was burned to death. So, of course, when you heard her voice, you knew you were dreaming. Yes, of course. She said, "David, this is Louise." "David, what's the matter? Why didn't you answer?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then in my dream, I answered, "It can't be Louise. Louise is dead." "I know, David." Louise's voice had the same mocking note I had learned to know so well when she was alive. "Why, of course." "This is just a dream," I told her. "In a minute, I'm going to wake up." "Oh, yes, indeed, darling," Louise answered. "I want you to be awake when I call you. I'm leaving the cemetery now. I'll be there soon." Then I suppose she hung up. I don't know. Suddenly it changed to the way dreams do, and I was sitting up, fully dressed, smoking a cigarette, waiting for Louise to leave the cemetery and come to my apartment. I knew she couldn't, but as one accepts this impossibility in a dream, I sat and I waited for her. I had smoked 2 cigarettes when the apartment doorbell rang. Mechanically, I crossed the room and opened the door. But it wasn't Louise who stood there. It was Richard. "Your twin brother, Richard?" "Yes, my twin brother, but taller than I, stronger, handsomer." He stood looking at me, smiling, self-assured, the old recklessness in his eyes. "Well, David," he asked, "aren't you going to invite me in? And after we hadn't seen each other in 15 years? "No, Richard," I cried, "you can't come back." "But I am back," he said, and he pushed past me into the room. "But I've been planning to visit you for a long time, and tonight seemed like such a good occasion." "Why have you come?" I demanded. "You're dead. Mr. Manson and I killed you." "Louise is dead too," Richard said, "but she's coming back tonight. Why shouldn't I?" "What do you want?" "Only to help you, David. You need somebody to stand by you tonight. You're much too nervous to face a dead wife by yourself." "Go away, Richard," I begged him. "There's someone at the door," he answered. "It must be Louise." "I'll leave you alone to talk to her, but remember, I'm here if you need me." He strolled into the next room. The doorbell sounded again. Impatiently, I opened the door. Louise stood there. She was dressed in all white, just as I had buried her. The veil that had hidden her terribly burned face made a little swirling movement around her head as she brushed past me silently into the room and settled ever so slowly into a chair. For a long moment, Louise said nothing, but then she said, "Why, David? You seem quite stricken dumb. Shut the door. It's causing a draft, and I'm not used to drafts. I've been shut up in a stuffy coffin for almost a year, you know." I closed the door, and the words burst from me. "What do you want here? Why have you come? You're dead." She burst into laughter. "Why, David, you really believe that, don't you? I'm not dead. I've just been having a little fun with you." "Fun with me," I repeated. She laughed until I thought she was having hysterics. "Yes, David," she giggled. You always react to such a crisis by getting jumpy, so I couldn't resist playing the role of a ghost to see what you'd do." "You're lying," I shouted at her. "You're dead. I saw you burned." "For heaven's sakes, David." She was annoyed now. "Do I look dead?" She flung back her veil and showed her face. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright, her teeth showing in a small feline smile. "The body you burned was a girl I picked up and was giving a ride. After the accident, I saw she was dead, and on the impulse, I put my ring on her fingers and slipped my handbag under her body. Then I set fire to the wreckage." "But why?" I groaned, sinking into another chair. "Why did you do it?" "Because it amused me." I was more tired of you than you of me, and I liked the idea of living as another person. Besides, I knew that when I got tired of the game, I could always come back. And now that I've run out of money, I'm back. But I'm getting married tomorrow to Anne. I know. I read the papers. It occurred to me that you might not want me to stay around. All right, David, darling. I'll go away and play dead some more. You can go ahead and marry the daughter of your best client, but of course, I'll need money. No, I won't give you any money. You're dead. I can just see the headlines tomorrow, Louise said. Prominent young lawyer's wife returns from grave. Supposedly dead wife interrupts wedding. No, I shouted. I won't let you. Really, all I need is $10,000, and I'll get a very quiet divorce, and your new marriage can be legalized again later. You see, it'll all work out and be very simple. I could not answer. My mind was whirling. I felt weak, confused, uncertain. Only the deep-seated realization that I was having a nightmare saved me from collapsing. Louise rose. Think it over. I'll go powder my nose. I'll give you 5 minutes, and then I'll expect a check. She walked out of the room. I covered my face in agony of indecision, wishing I could wake up. When I looked up again, Richard, my twin brother, was standing before me. I must say, you handled that rather badly, David. You let her scare you with her ridiculous joke about being dead. Now she knows she has you beaten. But she is dead, I cried. This is all just a dream. Who can say what's real and what's a dream? My advice is don't take that. Don't take any chances. If you give her money, she'll just come back for more. But there's nothing I can do, I said in despair. Of course there is, David. Louise died once. She must die again. No, I won't listen to you. Then I see I shall have to take matters into my own hands, as I did when we were boys. Look at me, David. No, I tried to turn my eyes away, but his gaze held me. Brilliant, mesmeric. Look into my eyes, David. I won't. But I couldn't turn away. I felt I had. Years ago, when we were boys, Richard's eyes grew bigger and bigger until they were pools of dark water in which I was about to be swallowed up in. Now, David, I'm going to take charge of your body as I used to, and you'll have to go where I've been all this time, deep down in our brain. I struggled for an instant longer, but his eyes, like enormous pools into which I was falling, came closer and closer, and there was a wrenching feeling, and Richard vanished. I knew he had won. He was real now. He controlled our body, and I was helpless. I could look and I could listen with eyes and ears, but I couldn't interfere with anything he chose to do. Louise re-entered the room. Her eyes were bright and self-assured. Well, David, she asked, have you made up your mind yet? Yes, Louise, I have. Richard spoke in a voice deeper than mine, stronger, more confident. Louise seemed puzzled by the change. Make the check to cash, she said in a moment. I'll get the divorce in Vegas. No one will associate my name with yours. Carpenter is a fairly common name. There will be no check and no divorce, Richard told her. There will be publicity, rather lurid and unpleasant. I will hardly do your career any good. There will be no publicity either. And just for your information, I'm not David. I'm Richard. Richard? Louise's face mirrored uncertainty. What on earth are you talking about? I'm David's twin brother. The one who does things that David doesn't dare to do for himself. You're being ridiculous. Now I'm going. I'll give you until 9 tomorrow to change your mind about that check. There will be no check. You have no intention of keeping any agreement, and I know it. Richard took a step forward. For the first time, Louise seemed alarmed. She turned as if to run. He caught her arm, spun her around, and with both hands seized her around the throat. I had to watch helplessly as his hands pressed more and more tightly on her throat, while her face changed colors and her eyes became enormous. She struggled for perhaps 30 seconds, trying to kick and scratch, until her struggle ceased, and that was the unconsciousness. Her face became livid. Saliva streamed from the corners of her slack mouth. Her eyes seemed to be forced from their sockets, glaring and open. Calmly, Richard continued the pressure onto her throat until she was unmistakably dead. Then he let her fall to the floor in a heap. "All right, David," he said. "You may speak now. You've killed her?" Richard wiped his lips with a handkerchief. "An interesting point. Have I or haven't I killed her? Was she alive? Or was she really dead all this time?" "You're confusing me," I complained. "Of course she was dead. This is only a dream. But even in a dream, we can't leave our body laying on the apartment rug, can we? It seems we must take her back from where she belongs, to Fairfield Cemetery." "But that's impossible." "It would be impossible for you, but not for me. I'm simply going to carry Louise down the elevator, get into a taxi, and drive to the cemetery. And now, all you're going to do is be silent until I permit you to speak." Calmly, he proceeded to carry out his insane scheme. First, he put on my hat and gloves, and then he took Louise's veil from her purse and pinned it to her hat. He brushed her coat and smoothed back her hair, which had become disarranged in the struggle. Then he picked up her body with his arms, carrying her as she were a sleeping child, and strolled to the elevator. He rang the bell and stood there, Louise's dead body cradled in his arms, humming to himself. The elevator came at a moment, and Jimmy, the night attendant, opened the door. "A little trouble, Jimmy," Richard said as he stepped in. He had to turn sideways to get Louise through the elevator door, and the moment made her purse slip from her lap where he had placed it. Jimmy scooped it up and put it back. "The young lady," Richard's tone was very man-to-man, "apparently had been drinking before she got here. I gave her one cocktail and she slipped out like a light. Now I've got to get her back home. Can you get me a taxi at the side entrance?" "Sure thing, Mr. Carpenter." It was apparent that Jimmy understood perfectly. I had expected detection, exposure, arrest. Instead, Jimmy brought the taxi, Richard stepped into it with Louise, and we started off as if it were perfectly natural for a man to carry a dead woman about New York at midnight. But clever though Richard was, such a mad scheme could not go without a hitch. The hitch occurred when the taxi driver turned and asked the address. "Fairfield Cemetery," Richard answered. "Fairfield Cemetery," the driver said. "At this time at night? You're kidding, mister?" "No, not at all." Richard always became annoyed when anyone would not take him seriously. "This lady is dead, and I'm going to bury her." "Listen, mister." The driver turned all the way around, a small, truculent little man whose face was red with anger. "I don't like you society mugs and your funny stuff. Now tell me where you want to go or get out of my cab." Richard hesitated, then shrugged. "Sorry," he said. "It wasn't a very good joke, was it? Take us to Riverdale. 937 West 235th Street. Okay, that's better." A moment later, we were treading our way through New York's busy after-theater traffic, Richard still cradling Louise's body in his arms, as if she were a child, leaned back and humming, "Waltz me around again, Willie." The ride that followed could only have happened in a dream. Through Times Square we went, through the bright lights dancing and flickering on Louise's face beneath her veil. Sometimes we stopped for traffic lights and pedestrians surged about us, peering in and snickering. Traffic police, staring briefly, were of no interest. Through the busy heart of the world's greatest city, Richard carried a corpse, and no flickering of suspicion passed through the mind of a single individual. Presently, we swung off the Henry Hudson Highway and sped along into Riverdale, where we drew up to the address Richard had given. This house, the house I bought for Anne and me to live in. Cautiously, Richard eased Louise out of the cab, managed to get his hand into his pocket and pulled out a bill, paid off the driver, and sent him away. The night was dark. The street was still. No one saw Richard as he unceremoniously dumped Louise on the cold stone steps, found the keys, then carried her inside. He didn't turn the lights on. Instead, he dropped Louise into the couch in the living room and sat down opposite of her and lit a cigarette. "All right, David, you can speak now," he said. "Richard, I am in anguish." I said in anguish, "Are you mad? Bringing Louise here? This is no better than leaving her in my apartment. Now what are we going to do?" "I'm considering that point now," Richard sounded petulant. He hated the obstacles that arose to balk his plan. Too bad that silly driver wouldn't go to the cemetery. And then Louise sat up. She sat up, swaying like one who is ill. Her hand went to her throat, and then she spoke. Her voice was hoarse, her words thick. "David," she said, "you tried to kill me." Richard turned to look at her. In the darkness, she was a blur, ghostly, remote. "It seems I didn't do a very complete job," he remarked, and announced again. Annoyingly, "You tried to kill me," she repeated, as if finding the fact impossible to believe. "You'll go to jail for this, I promise you will." Nothing of the sort. He rose to his feet, towered dangerously over her. "I merely have to do the job over again, that's all." Louise sank away from him. "No, for God's sake," she cried. "I'm sorry, David. I didn't mean it. I shouldn't have come back. I'll go away again. Really, I will. I'll never bother you again, David." "I'm Richard, not David," he told her, his voice sulky. "You're very hard to kill, aren't you, Louise? You've died twice now, and still you aren't dead. Perhaps the third time will make it final." "Richard, stop," I shouted at him. "Let her go. She means it. She'll go away, and never." You don't know that much about women like Louise," Richard sneered. "Anyway, this is between her and me now. You're becoming a nuisance. Go to sleep, David. To sleep." I felt myself becoming faint. Darkness overwhelmed me. In my dream, it happened as it happened those times when I was a boy. Richard banished me completely, was free to do just as he pleased. I knew nothing more until I found myself in my pajamas in my own bed. Richard stood in the center of the room, smiling at me. "Well, David, here you are, safe and sound again," he said. "And I'm off. I'll be back, though. You can count on that." "Louise," I exclaimed. "What have you done with her?" Richard yawned. "Forget Louise," he said. "She won't trouble you again. I persuaded her to see your point of view in the matter, David." "How? What did you do with her?" Richard merely smiled. "Good night, David," he said. "Oh, in the morning? I don't want you to be distressed or anything. So remember, this was just a dream, just an interesting dream." With that, he was gone. An instant later, I opened my eyes to find it was 9 in the morning and the alarm clock was ringing. And that was my dream, Doctor. "Thank you, David. I understand. I'm going to explain your dream to you, and then you'll never have it again." "Yes, Doctor." "Before your first wife, Louise, died, you wished her dead, didn't you?" "Yes, I wanted her to die." "Exactly. Then when she did die, you felt an unconscious sense of guilt. as if you'd murdered her. On the eve of your marriage to Anne, that sense of guilt manifested itself into a nightmare in which Louise was alive again. Probably the ringing of your alarm clock made you think of the telephone, and that started off the whole dream. Louise, Richard, everything. Do you understand? Yes, doctor, I understand. Now you're going to rest for a moment. When I next say wake up, you will do so. You will have forgotten the dream utterly. It'll never trouble you again. Now rest, David. Yes, doctor. Oh, Dr. Manson. Yes, Mrs. Carpenter. You're sure he won't ever have that dream again? Quite sure. His unconscious guilt feeling has been brought up to the surface. If I may put it away, and so it's removed. I'm so glad. Poor David was on the point of a breakdown. Oh, excuse me. There's the doorbell. Of course. It was the man with our blankets, a wedding present from David's sister. I sent them to be monogrammed. Aren't they lovely? Very beautiful indeed. I'll put them away. David has a cedar chest built beneath the window seat. It's airtight and completely moth-proof, the builder said. I certainly hope it is. I'd hate to have any moths get into the blankets like these. David, you may wake up now. Good. How do you feel? I feel fine, doctor. Only I'm Richard, not David. I'm surprised at you for thinking David was just telling you about a dream. You should know that only David's way of hiding the truth from himself. The first time there really was a phone call. And Anne. Stay away from the cedar chest, I warn you. Don't open it. All right, I warned you. But you had to go ahead and open it. Now, there's no use in you standing there screaming, you know.